We can pass them off as coincidences, or we could take it to the other extreme and say that it is a spiritual message from God that is telling us that we need to act. When you experience those coincidences in your life, at the very least, it's our subconscious attaching to something. Those coincidences are there. They're little moments of comfort, little bubbles of comfort. And at the very least, it's our subconscious telling us that maybe there's something that we should pay attention to. Hey everyone, welcome to Flow Over Fear. Today on this solo episode, I want to talk a little bit about coincidences that we experience in our lives. A lot of us might experience those times where we have some deja vu maybe, or we see something coincidental that happens that we just thought about earlier, and then we see the very thing that we thought about like out in the wild. And we wonder ourselves, what could that mean? And a lot of times we don't even think about it. Maybe even sometimes we don't even notice it. But these are times of serendipity that I've been frankly paying attention to a lot recently. And they tend to provide a little bit of comfort to me in some ways. And maybe some idea that, we might be on the right path a lot of times when we experience these, or maybe it's something trying to tell us this. And I don't really quite know how to define this without sounding very woo-woo kind of stuff, right? I mean, like spiritual in nature or what have you. But I do believe that some of those spiritual elements that we can't explain can sometimes, they could guide us in a lot of ways. And a few of these situations have happened recently. Let me kind of describe a couple of them. Some of them I still haven't really figured out, and a few of them are a little bit more like blatant in your face. And the more that I try to pay attention to these coincidences that happen in my life, the more important that I see them. And, one of the first times that I was exposed to like really paying attention to the coincidences in my life as a path toward maybe seeing that I was on the right path, or that maybe I needed to think about something a little bit more, was when I first got sober. As I stopped drinking and really leaned into the program of sobriety and the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I started to really listen to what the people were saying in those rooms. And there's a lot about spirituality. And part of the idea of recovering from alcoholism or any addiction, especially if you're going through a 12-step program, I mean, in the very first few steps, we talk about God. We talk about the idea of a spiritual relationship with a higher power. And it's often a higher power that we can't quite explain, but something to our understanding that helps us to know that something else is in control of our lives in a more powerful way. It's something comforting. And I know a lot of people might have a hard time attaching to that. But it is something that I encourage everybody to have an open mind about, because it helps. And one of those things that came up for me a lot in early sobriety and in the rooms of AA was this idea of coincidences, of noticing these coincidences that start happening. And a lot of times this is reported by newly sober people, including myself, where you just start to, your mind is starting to clear from the fog of the alcoholism. You're starting to maybe imprint a little bit more positive of a mindset. You're starting to get onto that pink cloud kind of thing. And you start to see the world a little bit differently. And you just start to notice things that are coincidental in nature. I can't quite recall anything off the top of my head that happened early on in sobriety. But I know that they were there, and I remember people talking about those coincidences that happen. It may be that you were talking to. It may be that you were talking to somebody in the rooms of recovery about how your grandmother used to have butterflies outside of her house, and then suddenly you would go out of that room or that meeting and you'd see a butterfly fluttering around. And it would wake up your senses to that coincidence. More recently, I've had a few of these situations happen where, again, some I can't really explain them, some I can. One recent one, however, really caught my attention because I have been thinking a lot in my own life as I, continue down this path of building a brand and continue with trying to see where this podcast goes to help people to change their relationship with fear in their own life and pursue more speaking engagements and decide that if my West message is really worth sharing. There's been a real sense of like driving force of like my own self-worth. And do I trust myself as the messenger on this? Am I really worth it? Is kind of the question. And a lot of us fall into that trap too of that imposter syndrome or feeling like we don't have a lot of or self-worth on particular topics or maybe we doubt ourselves in a certain way. And one day, a couple weeks ago, my wife shared with me a video by a woman named Jamie Kern Lima, who is a speaker. I've seen her speak before. I saw her speak about a year ago at a leadership function out here in Denver, Colorado, with a number of people. And she talks about self-worth, and she has a very, very interesting or really powerful story about how she created a line of cosmetics specifically for people who had challenging skin, or for all different skin types and body types and colors and pigmentations and all that kind of stuff. And she created this cosmetics line called IT Cosmetics, and how often she was rejected for that cosmetics line as she approached these major brands like Sephora or L'Oreal or all these other different cosmetics brands, and they all rejected her, saying almost the same thing, that people aspire to this idea of being they want to see people using those products that are perfect, that have I forget the word that they use, but it's something like a non-realistic or an unrealistic aspiration of what a person should look like. In other words, photoshopped. Can you imagine that, buying cosmetics on this assumption that the person that's selling it to you or advertising it to you is not a realistic expectation of what you're going to get? I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, we've seen that elsewhere too, with like McDonald's putting out the big old juicy, beautiful looking burgers, and they're really not even anything like that. But I digress. The whole idea was though that she eventually, like, she went through all that rejection. She eventually was able to build this brand that she sold for over 10 or 11 figures. It was over $1 billion sale, and it was a ridiculous sale. And she stayed the CEO of this company. Anyway, a long story about that to say that she wrote a book called Worthy. And my wife, and it's all about how people can establish their self-worth. And it was released recently, but my wife had sent me a book or sent me a video of Jamie Kern Lima, being interviewed by Oprah. And it was kind of a random video that she shared. And I watched it, and it was like she had told a very powerful poem about, self-worth, and something that I was glad to hear, because I've, been kind of struggling with that a little bit lately.
Hey everyone, I interrupt this program to introduce you to a powerful tool that will help you gain clarity on your vision and accelerate your growth and achievement. If you're listening to this show, it is likely that you have an exciting vision for your life. But the problem is that we often get caught up in the day-to-day. We get distracted, we face uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt. And as a result, the gap between where you are and where you want to be seems insurmountable. And that's why I created a framework for how you can turn your vision into strategic, disciplined action that will accelerate your results in the next 90 days. I call it the Vision Reflection Retreat. It is a 2-day solo excursion designed to reignite passion and adventure into your busy life and realign your focus toward your why. This is the very same framework that I use every 90 days to reflect on my own life and my vision and set my goals for the next quarter. And it has been a game changer. And the good news is that I'm giving away this Vision Reflection Retreat guidebook for free when you sign up for my newsletter. Simply go to flowoverfear.com/retreat and download your free guide. and enjoy the journey.
And then I came home, and later on that afternoon, my wife said, "Hey, did you get that video that I sent you?" And I said, "Yeah, it was great. It was very helpful." And at that very moment, we saw a package come up to the door. And I kid you not, this was not planned. My wife did not plan this. My wife did not buy the book. I don't know who got this book for us, but I went outside at that moment, the very second after my wife asked me if I watched the video, and I opened this box that was, from Amazon, delivered to me from I don't know who. And it was literally this book by Jamie Kern Lima, Worthy, talking about self-worth, how to believe you are enough and transform your life, how to believe you are enough and transform your life. It's also a topic that I discuss here regularly about overcoming that self-doubt and finding that self-worth. But that was too big of a coincidence to pass up. To this day, I still don't know why that book was sent to me, especially on that day when I watched that video over that same movie. Either it is ridiculously targeted marketing or it was just a wild coincidence. And I think that if I deduce it correctly, I think that where I got that book was when I saw Jamie Kern Lima speak at the leadership event about a year ago. She was probably in the process of writing that book. She probably collected some names from her team, and then she probably just had those books sent out, which was very, very generous, by the way. But again, I don't know where it came from. I don't have any clue. And the fact that it came on that day was a wild coincidence. And I think that those things tell us we can pass them off as coincidences. And I get that. We can just say it's a wild coincidence. We can just forget about it. Or we could take it to the other extreme and say that it is a spiritual message from God that is telling us that we need to act. And, I fall somewhere closer to that camp of that there is something spiritual to it. But regardless of where you sit on that, at the very least, when you experience those coincidences in your life, when you experience that serendipity, at the very least, it's our subconscious attaching to something. Our subconscious is putting meaning to something and placing an importance on the thing that we're noticing. And so in that case, given that our subconscious finds it important enough to put meaning on, it's signaling to us that maybe we should pay attention to those things and find the meaning in them. And when we find the meaning in them, if we put a powerful and empowering meaning behind it, we can actually help it move it in a direction that transforms our life. Like that coincidence connected me with this book, which I'm reading now. And in that process, I just randomly opened it to a page that told me something that I probably needed to hear. It's literally this sentence. And your past, where you come from doesn't have to determine where you're going. Where you come from doesn't have to determine where you're going. And your past can only hold you back if you live there. I learned this by feeling stuck for a long time and then learning how to break free. And so just reading that sentence, that was the first sentence I turned to in the book about how we don't have to be defined by our past. And we can forge our own path forward, and we can break free from the bonds of feeling stuck when we know that we are not subjects of our past. So I think there's a lot of serendipity, and I've tried to really engage in this process. And I don't really have any other great advice around this except pay attention. And if coincidences are something that you've been thinking about lately, in the serendipity that exists in your own life, and you've been wondering about this, take this as your next sign that maybe this is a coincidence. Maybe this is that serendipity that you should pay attention some more. And maybe this episode can be a catalyst to you finding more of that serendipity in your life. Because at the very least, you can attach to that meaning that you're putting behind it. And I personally believe that it's spiritual in nature. About a year ago, I think, I guess it was over the summer, I went on one of my personal retreats, one of my vision reflection retreats, which is, which is a retreat that I have every quarter or so, where I go out and I think about my vision for the quarter, and I talk about and I reflect on the last quarter. And I have a framework for this that I give away for free, by the way, on my website. You can go to adamcliffordhill.com and you can download it there. But I was going on this vision reflection retreat, and it was at a time when Jimmy Buffett had just passed away. And on the way down, or on the way back from that trip, I was listening to my radio station, and I was thinking about coincidences in my life, because this was topical. It was after, it was just something that was on my mind about thinking about these coincidences. And the idea of bubbles came up in my mind. Bubbles came up in my mind for some reason when I thought about Jimmy Buffett. And so I thought about bubbles, and I'm like, well, if there is something about this serendipity or this coincidence thing, I want to be reminded of bubbles, within the next couple weeks or so. I would love to I'm going to be on the lookout for where I see bubbles. And it's going to be a signal to me that this is something that I should pay attention to. And on that drive home, after I thought about that, a song came on. The station that I was listening to by Jimmy Buffett is a brand new song that I hadn't heard before, called Bubbles Up, which has become my favorite Jimmy Buffett song of late. Because the song describes how when we're in a challenging time, when we're feeling troubled, or when things just aren't quite feeling right or going our way, that we should always look for where the bubbles are going up. And the thing about that, the reason that comes about is a lot of times when boats would capsize, or people would fall under the water, and in storms and things like that, and you would be in the midst of drowning, and you wouldn't be able to know what direction was up or down. You would look for, in order to get up to the surface, you would look for the direction of where the bubbles were going, and then follow the bubbles. And that's the theme of the song Bubbles Up. It's a really beautiful song, and I would encourage you to listen to it. Bubbles Up. And that was the first most powerful meaning that I could get from that, because it seems so clear to me that even though there were some challenges that I was going through personally in my life at that time, and some decisions that I was making, just always think about that. Look for the bubbles and follow the bubbles up. And later on that week, I met another very incredible person for a coffee, named Aiki Chan, who is also going to be on this show within the next couple of months, who's got an incredible story of how she's overcome and persevered through some significant challenges. And in the midst of talking to her later that week, she talked at length about her story of how she went to an art class and was learning to draw. And the one thing that she wanted, and that the art teacher asked her to draw a picture that signified to her success. And guess what she drew? She drew bubbles. She drew just a series of bubbles on a canvas. And when she told me that, I stood in wonder for a second there, because it was another signal that there was just something I needed to listen to, some message. And even if it was my subconscious telling me that everything was going to be okay, that just knowing that those coincidences are there, they're little moments of comfort, little bubbles of comfort. And at the very least, it's our subconscious telling us that maybe there's something that we should pay attention to, because we've anchored some level of meaning to it. But maybe even more so, it could be a spiritual message to us that we need to listen to attach to, and maybe look into, maybe lean into a little bit to see what direction that is. So I would ask you as I close out this episode, what are some of the coincidences in your own life that you might be looking to? How can you open your mind to some of those coincidences you see, or the serendipity that you find in your life? It doesn't have to be woo-woo. At the very least, it could be something signaling to you that you have something deep inside you that is attaching meaning to it. If you're even more looking at it, it could be something spiritual in nature that can be, a connection from the other side, or from another world, that's giving you the guidance you need, or the reassurance, or the comfort you need to know that you are loved. So thank you for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for joining me today on Flow Over Fear. If you are liking this show, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. That way you'll be first to know when I drop a new episode, including interviews or trainings or dad jokes. That's right, dad jokes. Add a little levity to your life. And if you liked this episode in particular and you think somebody can get something from it, please share it with a friend. And that way we'll spread the message together. Thanks again for joining me today. We'll see you next time.